People who experience a strong sense of connection have about a 30% reduced all-cause mortality from those who feel lonely.
How does it affect things like diabetes and non-communicable diseases, and like how does the mental manifest into the physical?
Yeah, cortisol, for instance, can increase your insulin resistance by itself. That's going to do is make your glucose spikes after meals higher. It's going to make your HbA1c higher, which is basically a measure of the amount of sugar that's collecting on your cells.
Right.
That is the pathway to diabetes. It's all synergistic, right?
Yeah.
Not getting enough sleep, stress response,
Poor
either
diet.
drinking or eating, poor diet, yeah, all those come together.
Are we underrating the stress and the mental component?
I think most certainly we are. Removing sugary drinks and processed carbs from your diet will go a long way. Another measure of resilience is your metabolic switching, which is sort of your ability to switch from processing glucose to processing fat. And all carbs basically break down to glucose.
So that's why fasting is so important.
Exactly. If you are drinking a lot of sugary drinks, you're eating a lot of refined carbs, you're essentially flooding your body with glucose all the time, and your body can't switch from glucose to fat burning. Giving your metabolism a break is really helpful, and evolutionarily that's what happened.
So we're here with Dr. Taylor Sitler.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor is a doctor as well as a computer engineer combined. That's a really unique perspective and perception if you think about it, and so greatly suited for the future of the world.
Thanks. Yeah.
AI and tech is just powering everything through. You're a co-founder of Color Genomics.
Yes. Now Color Health.
Now Color Health.
Renamed.
Which is now a $4.5 billion company. World is really starting to wake up with all of these genome testing, methylation testing, right? You have, for the first time, it's accessible, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think part of what's happened, so it took a little while for people to realize that we wanted lots of different types of testing.
Yeah.
And the success of Function Health, for instance, I think is testament to the fact that people really want all of these different tests. At the same time, I think we're starting to understand what needs to be tested for folks. So you have new tests like biological age and mitochondria and things like that. And COVID really, I think, opened the door to, because it changed the way healthcare had to operate.
Yeah.
It opened the door to a lot of the new modalities and platforms that you're seeing now.
I've been involved in some clinics in Barbados, low-cost clinics.
Fantastic.
With my sister, well, my sister's clinics, but it's really brought me to an understanding of just how difficult non-communicable diseases are, high blood pressure, diabetes, like we really have some problems in that area. And it's not unique to the Caribbean, it's everywhere in the world. I was recently at a health conference in Abu Dhabi by M42, and they have a genome testing program where they're testing every Emirati's genome. And they say that it'll help them to ensure that future generations perhaps don't have that diabetic gene, like so that the gene that doesn't allow them to process carbohydrates in the same way, in the most optimal way,
is not passed on.
Is that? Can you explain that to me?
Well, I mean, in order for that to work, they would have to have some kind of an intervention at the time that women are becoming pregnant.
Right.
Right. What I can imagine several ways that could go.
Okay.
Right. Probably the one that fits in with the healthcare system today most easily is there's germline. Actually, Balaji's company, which no longer exists, but that idea of doing prenatal testing to identify dangerous genes is already done in clinical practice today. And so that could be done. It may be hard to do whole genome sequencing on the embryo, but it is possible because the DNA is in the mother's bloodstream.
Right.
So it could be possible to do that, and then they would just have to decide at what point to terminate a pregnancy, right? Some people decide, for instance, if they have a BRCA2 mutation that puts the fetus at risk for a number of different cancers, particularly if it's a woman, to terminate that pregnancy. So that would be the mechanism by which that has to happen. I can imagine other ways that you could implement that, but it's a combination of doing a genetic test like that, identifying the gene in a particular Emirati, and then identifying the gene in the progeny of that Emirati and deciding whether or not to continue with that.
You don't see a way that you can change genes. You can just have the power to decide whether you want to go forth with a birth or not.
Okay, so this is another way to do it. What you could do is modify the, you could modify either the sperm or the eggs of that individual, CRISPR or some other genetic technology.
Right. Okay.
And then you would have to do in vitro fertilization. So that's another way to do it. But again, it's pairing genetic testing with some kind of an intervention. Either they do that specific modification at the time of fertilization, or you choose whether or not to keep the embryo after genetic testing.
Okay, got it. Okay, you speak a lot about resilience. I really like that word, resilience.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. Obviously.
What is resilience in a healthcare context?
Yeah, so I think what I've been trying to do here is take a step back and figure out how we define health. So as we move into an age where we're trying to prevent disease rather than just treat it, right? A lot of people talk about proactive rather than reactive medicine. One of the first challenges is that preventing lots of diseases is hard. You have to sort of move away from a lot of different potential diseases, each one of which requires its own prevention program. If we had a core definition of health, then we could move toward health rather than away from disease. And so resilience is really, it's aspirational at this point, because I don't think we have all of the data that we need to prove that we're moving away from disease, but I think a lot of that data is starting to come in. So resilience really is a definition of health. So it's a definition that we can move toward. And I think it's a definition that a lot of people can relate to. When I think about what health is to me, it's the ability to bounce back from any kind of a challenge, whether it's a difficult, whether I went out, we had the white party last night and I'm feeling okay this morning, despite the fact that I had a couple of drinks and I didn't sleep very well. Or it's, how quickly do you bounce back after studying for exams, or a long stretch at work where you had to push yourself and maybe you weren't sleeping enough, or a workout, a triathlon. This idea of health is intimately tied with your ability to rest and recover. And that really, I think, is the core of resilience. And that resilience requires a couple of things. So I think physiologically, there's a concept called allostasis that's been around since the 1980s. Originally developed by Bruce McEwen. The idea here is, rather than homeostasis, rather than having a fixed set point that the system comes back to when things are perturbed, when you have a challenge, the system will dynamically set itself and adapt. And we see that happening in single-cell organisms, and we see that happening in humans. There's a lot of predictive changes that happen in the body as you experience different things. So the classic example would be, you're in a stressful situation, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, there's a big dump of cortisol into your bloodstream, your glucose level goes up and your body is ready to fight. Your immune system actually changes the cohort or the prevalence of different sets of immune cells proactively before you even go into a fight or flight, before you have your encounter with the lion or whatever your modern equivalent is. So the body really reacts ahead of time. And that's a core part of how resilience works, is moving to a new set point either before a challenge or after a challenge. The stress response is an example where you would move to a new set point before a challenge in order to meet it. We see, for instance, if you have a hard workout, your muscles don't just recover to the strength that they had prior to the workout, right? These damaged cells actually become stronger afterward. And so that recovery makes you stronger. So allostasis is a key part of it. And then I think the other concept that we see across, and this is really more in health behaviors, is hormesis. So the idea that regular low challenges actually improve your adaptability and your resilience. And you see that in lifting weights. You see that in people who are training for marathons, running longer and longer distances. You see that with people who do sauna and cold plunge. And you also see it with some of the metrics that we're seeing in health now more prominently, like HRV. So heart rate variability really is a metric that measures adaptability or resilience. So resilience has it's both a concept of health that I think people can relate to, the idea that your adaptability and ability to recover is your health. And then it's got some physiological grounding that enables us to measure it. And then I guess maybe the third piece of resilience that's critical is it unifies the psychological and physical aspects of health, because the idea that your brain is separate from your body, I think, is pretty artificial.
Expand.
So, well, I mean, my understanding is the reason that we have this, the sort of the mental and physical health being separate, came from Descartes, because he was trying to petition the church to enable him to do anatomy, to learn about anatomy. That the church would not let him originally dissect people, because it was thought that the spirit was tied to the body. So in order to be able to do that, he had to have like a theory or a framework where the spirit would leave the body after death. And so we have this idea that somehow your thoughts and the way you think and the way your brain works is separate from your body. But we now have 30 years of data on how exactly what happens and how they're linked. So for instance, in a stress response, what hormones are released? How physiologically is your body changing? We also have some really compelling data on what the impact of psychology is on our body. And I would say that the strongest data there is some meta-analyses by Julia Holt-Lundstad, where she's established that for people who experience a strong sense of connection, have about a 30% reduced all-cause mortality from those who feel lonely, right? And that's massive, right? That's a huge shift.
What you spoke about heart rate variability.
Mm-hmm.
What's the mental component of heart rate variability? Have you done any
Yeah.
studies on that?
So I think the maybe the way to think about it is there are different ways to measure resilience, and when you're measuring different aspects of it. It's sort of like tire pressure or your gas gauge or things like that, right? You measure different elements in order to understand your total resilience. HRV is really more a measure of your cardiac resilience and your cardiometabolic resilience. And this is something, for instance, that Whoop uses to tell you, should you work out hard today or should you rest and recover? So that's really, to me, it's more a measure of your cardiovascular system and what you can support in terms of exercise. The measures of things like mental resilience are more actually self-reported, how people feel. And then sometimes there are sort of new frameworks where people will undergo these difficult mental challenges, like overcome, do something that's really hard, and then see how you do it. Do something that you think is impossible. Not necessarily a physical challenge, but building a business, overcoming an obstacle, those types of things.
Okay, but do you see a difference in heart rate variability after achieving something in particular?
So resilience is linked, right? And potentially synergistic. People who are, so maybe one way that the mental and the physical are linked here is people who have difficult stress responses, people who don't recover as quickly from a stressful event, people who are chronically stressed, tend to have a lower heart rate variability than those who undergo stress and then can release it. And yeah, I think there are many studies now that are showing that. And there's I think a link between the cortisol to DHEA ratio and HRV,
Right. Chronic stress.
chronic stress.
Where do you see that come from, and how does it affect things like diabetes and
Yeah,
non-communicable
sure.
diseases, and like how does the mental manifest into the physical?
Yeah. Well, so there are lots of ways. It's hard for me to give you a single explanation. So cortisol, for instance, can increase your insulin resistance by itself.
Right.
So if your cortisol levels are higher, you're going to end up being more resistant
Right.
to insulin. And what that's going to do is make your glucose spikes after meals higher. It's going to make your HbA1c higher, which is basically a measure of the amount of sugar that's collecting on your cells.
Right.
And that is the pathway to diabetes.
Right.
So that's one direct link.
Right. There's so much attention focused on the foods that we eat.
Yeah.
Like the processed foods and the
Sure.
and the sweet drinks, and especially in like where I come from. But you're saying that literally the cortisol increases your insulin resistance, right?
Yep.
And that's the highway to diabetes too.
Also, yeah, it's all synergistic, right?
Yeah.
Not getting enough sleep, stress response, and then drinking a lot of either drinking or eating, poor diet. Yeah, all those come together.
Would you say, do you have any insight in terms of a percentage of each? Like,
well, I think,
are we underrating the stress and the mental component?
I think most certainly we are, because we don't have good ways to measure it. But that said, like removing sugary drinks and processed carbs from your diet will go a long way.
Just helps you become more resilient.
Yeah. Another measure of resilience is your metabolic switching, which is sort of your ability to switch from processing glucose to processing fat. And all carbs basically break down to glucose. So not technically, but it's an easy way to think about it, and that's mostly true. So if you are drinking a lot of sugary drinks, you're eating a lot of refined carbs, you're essentially flooding your body with glucose all the time, and your body can't switch from glucose to fat burning. And that ability to switch is actually linked to resilience.
So that's why fasting is so important.
Exactly. Yeah, I think when possible, giving your metabolism a break is really helpful, and evolutionarily, that's what happened. Now, I think we're learning that there are some important differences in the way women and men should approach fasting.
Can you talk about that?
I don't know a ton about it, but what I can say is like the 16-8 paradigm, the sort of 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating, tends to work much better for men than for women. And a lot of that has to do with the way that it's hormone cycles, particularly women who are trying to become pregnant, or if their metabolisms are different enough that the fasting patterns also need to be different. And I think there's not, as far as I know, and again, I'm not an expert here, there's not established guidance for women on how to undergo fasting. It may be that periodic fasting, like every couple of months, doing a 2-day fast or a 3-day fast is better, versus any kind of like intermittent fasting that is every day. Or it may be that, it needs to be 12 hours rather than 16 hours, right? And longer fasting periods actually aren't good. So I think we're still trying to figure that out.
I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you spoke about stoicism. We're in the we're in Greece.
We're
the home of a lot of the great philosophers.
Yeah.
Stoicism is certainly a philosophy that I see like as a staple among the tech ecosystem. How does it lead to resilience?
Well, I think if you can adopt the Stoics' mind, regardless, I think there are potentially some issues with how you get there, but the Stoics' mind meaning not overreacting to situations, having a response to a situation that's appropriate to it, enables you to be more resilient. It's in fact core to it. A lot of times, I think when things go sideways, right, when things become difficult, when you feel threatened, when your livelihood might be in jeopardy, we tend to have these strong responses, and without some help, a lot of people can't reason their way through it. They can't have an appropriate reaction.
Right.
And so I think it's working on your mental state, understanding your own reactions to the point where you can handle a wide range of events. And in that way, I think Stoicism is almost synonymous with resilience.
So basically, lashing out makes you less resilient physiologically speaking, right? Because you spike your cortisol, you spike your insulin.
Yeah. Well, and particularly if you hold on to it, right? If you hold grudges, if you stay in that space, if you're constantly angry, you're constantly stressed, you're constantly anxious, which it's easy to do in a startup context, you're not resilient.
But it also limits your options in the future, right? You burn bridges, which could lead to later resiliency, like.
Oh, sure. Well, there's that aspect to it too. Yeah.
With less bridges, it's more stressful. So it's like a double.
Yeah, it's a reinforcement loop for sure.
It doubly cripples your resiliency in some ways.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I've been talking about more recently is that resilience is built better in groups. So there's this mental component to it, and I can talk more about the specifics of the mental component. I think one reason I give for working together in groups or thinking about health as a group activity is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to do something right now, do it. But if you want to go far, you need to go together, which means building a group of folks around you that care about the same things. That gives you the social connection that you need, right? Because we know that feeling connected is associated with better health. It also gives you the accountability, someone who's maybe giving you a perspective when you need it, asking if you did the thing that you said you would do. So those groups actually make people in them more resilient. And I think we're starting to see evidence that building those groups enables better resilience for everybody. So I think there's an element of this which is inherently social. And yeah, if you're lashing out, if you're angry, if you're intentionally isolating yourself, you're going against that.
Literally. So triple. That's a triple whammy. If we had to say the top 3 things to increase our resiliency right now.
Yeah, I would start with the mental component because that's really the unlock for the rest.
Right.
And I think, so Mark Devine does a great job of talking about mental resilience. He's a retired Navy SEAL commander, and he used mental resilience as one of the key the key traits on which to choose who would become a Navy SEAL. And he defines it as the ability to adapt to different situations, as well as the ability to recover from failure. So I think specifically focusing on that is really helpful. So working on your ability to recover from failure, working on your ability to adapt, and doing that in a group context with other people will start to increase your health by itself. And then it actually, you can do so resilience is about becoming more adaptable. And I think a part of that for many people is sort of daily health challenges. So it's, exercising in some form each day, for instance. And you can build that resilience, that ability to adapt by doing something that is maybe just a little bit difficult each day, right? Whether it's swimming a little bit further, running a little bit further, doing a walk that you wouldn't have otherwise done. I think that's the most important piece of resiliency, because that's the unlock to the rest of the behavior change that you'll have to undergo. So I think there's pretty good, a lot of people will agree, I think most physicians will agree, that sleep, exercise, diet are the most critical components to health. And those are behaviors that you're going to adopt. So working on, I think, those 3 as a starting point, having challenges around those would be, I think, that's where I would start for resilience, building out a group that's associated with it. And then there are a variety, I think then it becomes very personalized, depending on what you want to do, who you are, what health means to you. I think so maybe if you're going to pick an exercise habit, for instance, you want to pick something that you like because you're going to do it a lot. So it's that sort of thing. That's where I would start with resilience.
You spoke about a study that was done, or a group that in Finland, where they were able to decrease their rates of cardiovascular illness by 85%.
Yeah, so this is resilience applied at a larger scale.
Okay.
And I think might actually be a useful study for your clinics. So in the early 1970s, the community, this is called North Karelia, was the name of the community in Finland, became very alarmed that just the number of people that were dying of heart disease. And so they worked with the local physicians over the course of 5 years, I think from 72 to 77. They started establishing these programs to help people avoid the causes of death from heart disease, which we know are smoking, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. Right? There's more that we know now, but we know those three were really important. And over the course of about 15 years, through community programs and advertising and just keeping each other accountable, they were able to reduce the incidence of death from cardiovascular disease by 85%, which is incredible. I mean, I haven't seen that in any health system. So I think that's an example of a community-based effort that had remarkable results in resilience. And so by shifting people's health behavior from things that were reducing their resilience to things that, or at least moving them away from those negative behaviors, they were able to have a huge impact on death from cardiovascular disease. I think there's an opportunity to do things in a positive way as well, and you're starting to see that.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Exactly.
Okay, so metabolic health, right? And energy to cells.
Well, we talked a little bit about metabolic switching. I think so. So metabolic health is, well, I think we're still learning. We know that mitochondria, which are the organelles that produce energy for our cells, those are core for life. And metabolism at its core is really generating energy, right? It's using glucose or fat to generate energy. So the healthiness or resilience of an individual is going to be related to their mitochondrial function, right? How well are those mitochondria producing energy, as well as how are those sources, the glucose and the fat, being used to generate that energy. Right? And we talked about the importance of metabolic switching. How you produce that energy relates to a whole number of diseases, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, potentially Alzheimer's. So some of the major non-communicable diseases are they happen through poor metabolic health.
Right. The metabolism is great. Basically, the energy plant, right?
Yeah. Right.
For every cell in your body, and that's what really dictates longevity and resilience.
That's a part of it. Metabolic health, your mitochondrial function, right? Inflammation is another big one. That's another big pathway that's related to it.
Yeah. Can we talk about inflammation? I mean, I feel like what is inflammation? And
that's a good question. I mean, inflammation is actually required for health. So it's the functioning of your immune system, right? Inflammation can be both good and bad.
Okay.
When you get a cut, you want inflammation, right? You want the cells to come in, remove any bacteria that are there, and then initiate the healing process. When you, on the flip side, COVID is an example of inflammation gone wrong, where the reason people die from COVID is an overreaction to the virus that then causes your immune cells to flood your lungs, and so you can't breathe anymore. So inflammation can be both positive and negative. It's also one of the core ways that aging is pervade. So it's aging happens because we have worsening inflammation over time. Inflammation leads to senescent cells that are now, we understand, are a core part of aging. And misguided inflammation reduces our ability to survey for cancer, for instance, remove cancers from the body. Or it leads to the buildup of plaques in the brain because the immune cells aren't functioning properly. So inflammation is really all about the functioning of your immune system in sickness and also in health. And over time, immune dysfunction leads to, I think a simple way to think about aging is it's sort of the trash collection doesn't happen in the body anymore. You get a buildup of sugars, you get a buildup of amyloid, you get a buildup of potentially tau protein in the brain. All these different things start to accumulate, and you get a buildup of senescent cells, and your body doesn't function as well.
So chronic inflammation is basically a low immunity.
Yeah, I mean, low and high have kind of arbitrary meanings here. It's a pretty complicated system. But there's sort of autoimmunity that can come from your immune system overreacting to your body. And then there's some people experience, lack of immunity or not enough white blood cells.
So if we were to test our inflammation levels,
Yeah.
through CRP or biomarkers, what would you recommend? Like, what's the
and so people are starting to understand this. This again is like there's a whole field around this, right? That relates to, like, I think resilience provides a lens on this, but I'm not an expert in it. So the things I know are related to chronic inflammation, which is also related to cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's. So chronic inflammation leads to the development of plaques in the arteries because you have macrophages there that are pulling in that cholesterol. So inflammation plays a role in that. But measuring things like IL-1, IL-6, TNF-alpha, CRP, those are some of the common proteins and cytokines that we'll measure to assess someone's inflammation levels and how they're progressing. I think we'll understand more in a couple of years as the science continues to progress. But tracking those, I think, is already a good starting point. And a lot of people, for instance, have high chronic CRP levels, and there are various ways to address that depending on what your particular issue is.
What's one way to address high chronic CRP levels?
Well, so one thing poor metabolic health, as an example, which I think a lot of people experience, leads to generally you are, because you're not switching to fat, you're storing those fat burning, you're storing those calories as fat. So you have larger fat reserves, and then you get inflammation in the fat itself. And that can...
You get inflammation in the fat?
Yeah, so macrophages will actually infiltrate the fat cells, and they'll produce some of these cytokines. And
what can you tell by how you feel, or can you tell by looking at someone? Can you really only...
I mean, I think,
like, in terms of if the body is storing water,
yeah,
is that a sign?
Not. I mean, CRP is a reasonable. That's why we measure these proteins, and so that's one, like, CRP. Just looking at your CRP level is reasonable. I think another thing people will look at is the liver ultrasounds now are starting to be able to uncover fatty liver or non-alcoholic. What is it called? It's NASH. I'm forgetting the full name, but there's basically when you get these fatty deposits in the liver, and that's evidence that your metabolism is off.
Right.
So that can be measured. There are a couple of different tests that are coming out to measure that. But I think there are these specific tests that you can do. So CRP and ultrasound for NASH. Those are things that you can do to look at whether you have a healthy metabolism or not, and are correlated with this sort of chronic inflammation.
Okay, we're just about to wrap up.
Okay.
But I just want to ask you, there's 8 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Most live with very little, but struggle with even more so with some of these issues. Like, what is a actionable, reasonable
Yeah, what's a starting point for them?
Strategy for them. That's what do you recommend?
Yeah,
If you
I
had to
think
give some advice.
the big, to start with, I guess, find an exercise habit that you like. Pay attention to how you feel in your sort of mental health, or let's leave that aside. Sorry. Find an exercise habit that you like. Call a friend, and throw away your alarm clock. Those would be the three things that I would say, and that will lead to better sleep, better exercise, and we have tons of data that that's great, and better connection.
So more so than the food, more so than alcohol.
I would start there. Yeah, food and alcohol come too, but those can be harder for people to change.
Yeah.
And that's why I was for your clinic specifically, like if you're finding in that population that it's sugary drinks and carbs, maybe that is the right starting point.
No, but maybe it's
intervention.
maybe we're not realizing how much the mental component plays, you know?
I think it does. I think it's a big one, because then you can, if you're able to do those three things, I think when you introduce the idea of changing someone's diet, they'll be more receptive to it.
Well, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. It was fun talking with you.
It was so good speaking with you as well, and such great information. It's so good to be on the cutting edge of this stuff.
Yeah, it's evolving really quickly. It's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many fantastic.
Are there
people.
any tests like color genomics or levels, or are there any particular tests that you would recommend to go for first?
For resilience? I think the most accessible one for everybody is probably HRV.
Okay.
So getting a Whoop or something like that, measuring your HRV. Probably after that would be your VO2
How long
max.
does it take to get from a low HRV to a high HRV?
Oh, that's hard to say.
Yeah.
I
That's a $1
can't-
million question.
Yeah, and there are lots of people that are trying to answer it.
Okay, well, enjoy your kite surfing today.
Yeah, I will. I will. You too. I hope you can get out while you're here.
Yeah, probably not, but don't worry, I got lots of kiting in.
Sounds like it. Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.